They say lightning never strikes the same place twice, but for one man, it struck every night inside his mind. In the late 1800s, a lonely inventor stood in a dark room, surrounded by thunder he had built with his own hands. His name was Nikola Tesla, the man who gave light to the world and died in darkness. He dreamed of free energy for everyone, power without price, a world where humanity would rise on the shoulders of invention, not greed. And for that dream, he gave everything. He gave his blueprints, his ideas, his soul. While others built empires from his genius, Tesla built loneliness. He believed that purity of intention would protect him from betrayal. It didn't. Because when the world sees someone who gives without limit, it doesn't see a saint, it sees a resource. And the same hands that applauded him were the ones that quietly stole his legacy. He once lit up an entire city, but no one lit a candle for him when he died. That's the curse of the overgiver. You think you're spreading light. But the truth is, the world will drain your fire if you never learn to guard it. So before you offer your next piece of peace, your next idea, your next heart, ask yourself, are you giving because you choose to, or because you're afraid not to? Because that question, that one truth, could change the way you give forever. Watch till the end, because what comes next might just change the way you see kindness itself. There was once a man who grew a garden so beautiful people stopped just to stare. Roses that caught the morning light like flames, jasmine that whispered through the wind, and every time someone admired it, he'd pluck a flower and offer it to them. One flower became 10. 10 became hundreds. Until one morning he looked around and realized there was nothing left blooming for himself. His garden had turned into dust. The soil was still there. The roots were alive. But everything beautiful he had, he gave away believing that generosity would make him loved. Here's the thing. He didn't give because he wanted to. He gave because he wanted to be seen. And that is how most people live. They think kindness is love. But sometimes it's just fear dressed politely. Fear of rejection. Fear of conflict. Fear of being misunderstood. So we overgive. We give our time to people who never show up for us. We give our loyalty to those who play both sides. We give our forgiveness before they even apologize. And then we wonder, why does it hurt so much to be good? Because you weren't giving love. You were bargaining for it. You were trying to buy peace in a world that only respects power. Think about it. You say I'll help you, but what you really mean is, please don't leave me. You say it's okay, but what you mean is, I can't afford to lose your approval. And then one day, you realize you're not kind, you're exhausted. Not generous, just depleted. Not respected, only used. This is the paradox of overgiving. The more you give without awareness, the more invisible you become. Because people don't see your intention. They see your availability. They don't see your sacrifice. They see your silence. In a world that feeds on attention, being endlessly kind is like bleeding into the ocean. The sharks will call it love. Let's make it real. At work, you stay late to help others finish their job. They thank you once, then expect it forever. In relationships, you forgive every lie, every missed promise, because you believe love means patience. But every time you do, they learn something dangerous, that your love has no limits. And once someone learns you have no limits, they stop respecting your boundaries. See, here's the brutal truth most people won't tell you. When someone offers you a flower and you hand them your entire garden, you're not being noble, you're being naive. Because they didn't ask for your world. You offered it hoping they'd never leave. That's not generosity, that's emotional gambling. You're betting pieces of yourself for the chance to feel seen. But what this really means is, you've forgotten that not everyone deserves to see the garden you built. Some people only visit to trample it. Others come to pick what they can and leave before the rain. Very few will stay to help you water it. So the question becomes, are you giving from abundance or from emptiness? Are you offering flowers or are you giving away your roots? Because when you give from fear, you don't grow gardens, you burn them. And when you burn your garden enough times, you start believing there's nothing beautiful left inside you. That's how kindness turns into bitterness. That's how love turns into resentment. The man who offered his garden learned this too late. He tried to replant, but something had changed. The soil still grew things, but they never smelled the same again. That's what happens when you give too much. You lose the fragrance of who you are. So if your life feels empty right now, if your kindness feels thankless, don't ask what's wrong with the world. Ask how many times you gave your garden away just because someone smiled at your flowers. Because love isn't measured by how much you give, it's measured by how much you keep sacred. And if you've forgotten that, you're not alone. Most people do. But remember this, you can grow again. And next time someone asks for a flower, you'll know. You don't have to give them the garden. You can still be kind without being consumed. Because a real garden doesn't bloom for approval. It blooms because it's strong enough to survive its own seasons. History remembers power, but it forgets the cost of giving it away. Every empire, every genius, every warrior carries the same scar. They loved something or someone so much they handed it everything. And the world took it, smiled, and asked for more. Take Hadrian, the Roman emperor who tried to rule with mercy instead of fear. He rebuilt cities, pardoned enemies, raised monuments for peace. But the same senators he spared plotted his downfall behind marble walls. He thought mercy would soften hatred. It only made the wolves hungrier. Because when power shows compassion without caution, it stops being respected, it becomes entertainment. People test it, poke at it, see how far it bends before it breaks. Hadrian learned that kindness from the throne is a double-edged sword. The moment the empire sensed softness, rebellion followed like shadow after light. He once said, "It is hard to be loved by those you must discipline." He was right, but what he never said aloud was this: it is even harder to discipline those you've taught to expect endless grace. That's the first punishment of the overgiver. You create dependents, not allies. And one day, they will turn on you for the same comfort you gave them. Then there's Nikola Tesla, a man who held lightning in his hands and offered it freely to the world. He dreamed of giving energy without profit, invention without ownership. He trusted promises, shared his blueprints, signed contracts he didn't read. While others built empires from his ideas, he built loneliness. He thought purity of intention would protect him from greed. It didn't. The wolves that hunted him wore suits and smiles. They toasted him at dinners, called him genius, and quietly erased his name from patents that would shape the next century. Tesla's tragedy wasn't poverty. It was innocence. He believed the world would love him for what he gave. But the world only loved the glow of his inventions, not the man who burned himself to make them shine. That's the second punishment of the overgiver. You build miracles, but you forget to build fences. And when you don't guard your light, others sell tickets to your fire. And then comes Shaka Zulu, the warrior who forged a kingdom from chaos. He gave his warriors discipline, order, purpose. He gave his people protection and pride. But in his hunger to make them strong, he gave too much of himself. He gave his trust. He gave his heart to men who whispered loyalty by day and plotted by night. When his mother died, he commanded the nation to mourn for a year. No crops planted, no children born. Grief became law. What began as love turned into madness. The same people who once worshipped him rose up and ended him. Because every giver, no matter how powerful, forgets the same truth. When you hand the world your soul, it learns your weakness. And the world always punishes weakness disguised as love. 3 men, 3 worlds apart, yet the same wound. The emperor who gave mercy. The inventor who gave light. The warrior who gave everything. Different stories, same ending. The more they offered, the more the world demanded, until their gardens turned to ash. But this isn't just history. You see it today in offices, families, friendships, love. The worker who trains his replacement out of goodwill, then gets replaced. The friend who always listens but is never heard. The man who gives second chances until there is nothing left of him but the outline of patience. We tell ourselves giving is noble, and it can be. But when giving has no boundary, it stops being virtue, it becomes self-betrayal. Because real power isn't measured by how much you give. It's measured by how well you decide who receives it. Hadrian could have ruled longer if he had ruled less gently. Tesla could have died wealthy if he had guarded one idea. Shaka could have lived as legend instead of warning if he had loved his people with limits. That's the pattern. That's the curse. The overgiver mistakes generosity for destiny. but destiny belongs to the one who learns when to close his hand. And you, how many times have you done the same? How many gardens have you handed over, hoping someone would finally say, "You're enough"? Here's the secret history never teaches. The strongest hearts are not those that give endlessly. They are the ones that know when to stop, when to protect their soil, when to let silence answer the next request. Because mercy without discernment destroys empires. Creativity without defense destroys geniuses. Love without limits destroys kings. You don't owe the world your garden. You owe it your wisdom. And that means learning the art every powerful soul eventually learns to give like a storm, but guard like a mountain. Most people give to be liked. The powerful give to lead. The difference is invisible from a distance, but worlds apart in meaning. A weak man gives because he fears rejection. A strong man gives because he has already accepted himself. And that's where everything changes. See, the moment you stop giving to please others and start giving to create order, you cross from emotion into power. That's how men like John D. Rockefeller operated. He wasn't just a businessman, he was an architect of control. He gave money the same way a general gives orders, with precision, intent, and consequence. He built hospitals, universities, foundations not because he wanted applause, but because he understood the psychology of influence. Every donation was a seed of loyalty. Every act of generosity came with invisible strings of gratitude. And gratitude, when multiplied across nations, becomes obedience. When critics accused him of greed, he smiled and gave more away. But behind the smile was a lesson: if they can't hate you less, make them owe you more. That's what most people miss about giving. It's not the act that defines you, it's the frame behind it. Rockefeller knew that real generosity isn't about loss. It's about circulation. Money moves, reputation expands, influence grows. He didn't cling to wealth, he directed it like a river. He once said, "Charity is injurious unless it helps the recipient to become independent." That was his quiet way of saying, "I'll give, but only in ways that make you stronger or more loyal." He turned giving into a structure, a system of self-replenishing power. Contrast that with Marcus Crassus, Rome's richest man. His fortune came from manipulating disaster, buying the homes of the desperate, lending gold to emperors, saving lives at a price. Cold? Maybe. But in his own brutal way, he understood what Rockefeller did too, that giving without strategy makes you a servant. Giving with awareness makes you a ruler. Crassus didn't hand out generosity, he leased it. And the Roman elite, for all their pride, kept returning to him. Even Caesar himself owed Crassus a debt not just of gold, but of survival. That's power. When people stop asking what you can do for them and start realizing they can't move without you. It's ugly but true. The world doesn't reward purity. It rewards precision. Most people are emotional givers. They hand out their time, love, and loyalty like confetti at a parade. It feels good in the moment, but once the music stops, all that's left is cleanup. The wise don't give impulsively. They give with foresight. They understand that every yes creates a future expectation. Every favor plants a seed. The question is, will that seed grow into a bridge or a trap? Think about your own life. At work, when you help someone who never reciprocates, you're not building respect, you're teaching them your free labor. In love, when you forgive the same betrayal over and over, you're not building connection, you're teaching them your boundaries are optional. In friendship, when you always initiate, always fix, always show up, you're not being loyal, you're being predictable. And predictability is death to power. That's why the powerful are misunderstood. They don't give less, they give differently. They give in ways that serve mutual growth, not one-sided depletion. You'll notice something about people like Rockefeller. They never brag about giving. They give, then disappear. Because true giving doesn't beg for validation. It controls the narrative without needing credit. When Crassus funded Caesar, he didn't ask for a statue. He asked for position, for access, for leverage. And history remembers Caesar's name, but make no mistake, Crassus built his road to glory. So, the question isn't whether you should give, it's why. Are you giving to be needed, or are you giving to be remembered? Because one leaves you drained, the other leaves you in control. Here's the quiet paradox of mastery: the strongest men don't stop giving. They just start giving with edges. Every act of generosity becomes a blade sharp, deliberate, balanced. Cut too deep, and it destroys. Use it right, and it builds empires. You can still be kind, you can still help, but you must learn to give without losing yourself in the transaction. Rockefeller gave to strengthen the system that fed him. Crassus gave to weave the empire into his debt. Both understood the law that most never learn giving without boundaries creates slaves. Giving with strategy creates kings. And maybe that's the shift you've been avoiding, realizing that power and compassion are not opposites. They're twins, separated only by intent. So next time someone reaches for your flower, ask yourself, is this a gift or an investment? Because the moment you know the answer, you stop being used. You start being remembered. At some point, giving stops being about kindness. It becomes identity. And that's when the danger begins. Because when you've built your worth around what you offer others, you forget what it feels like to exist for yourself. You start mistaking being needed for being loved. You start mistaking exhaustion for purpose, and every yes chips away a small piece of your reflection. That's where Hedy Lamarr lived between genius and invisibility. The world called her the most beautiful woman alive. But while the cameras flashed, her mind was designing inventions decades ahead of her time, the frequency-hopping technology that would one day make Wi-Fi possible. She offered her brilliance to a world obsessed with her face. She gave her ideas freely, her patents without greed. And the world took them, without her name, without her glory. While others made fortunes from her genius, Hedy died nearly forgotten, a woman who had given more than the world could see. That's what happens when you give in a world that only values the parts of you it can exploit. You become both admired and erased. The same pattern lived in Frida Kahlo. She gave everything, her art, her pain, her soul to those she loved. Her canvases bled emotion. Her letters ached with longing. Even her suffering became her offering. She loved Diego Rivera so deeply that she painted her heartbreak as devotion. She turned agony into beauty, thinking it would be enough to make him stay. But here's the truth. Frida never said even the strongest love can become a prison when it costs you your identity, because the more she gave, the more invisible she became to herself. The world celebrated her art, but inside, she was painting her own disappearance. That's the punishment of emotional generosity. It feels sacred, but slowly dissolves your sense of self. And that's not just Frida's story. It's ours. We all carry a little of that pattern. We post our achievements, hoping someone will see our worth. We pour our hearts into relationships that don't have room for us. We sacrifice rest, dreams, and peace just to prove we're good enough to be chosen. But here's the thing, no one tells you if love demands the death of your self-respect. It's not love. It's worship in disguise. And worship always ends with a fall. Look closely at your own life. Have you ever apologized for wanting too much? Or felt guilty for needing rest? Have you ever told yourself they'll notice eventually and they never did? That's the quiet erosion of identity. You become the reliable one, the strong one, the forgiving one, everything, except the one who is allowed to need anything back. That's how overgivers slowly disappear. Not in one big moment, but in 1,000 small concessions. Each one disguised as kindness. Each one applauded by others. Until one day, you wake up and realize you don't know who you are without the people you serve. That realization hurts more than betrayal. Because betrayal is sudden. Self-erasure is slow. It happens in silence, beneath smiles, inside compliments like you're such a good person. But here's the truth the world hides. Being good is easy. Being whole is rare. That's why people like Frida and Hedy matter, because they show us what happens when brilliance and heart aren't protected. When your garden becomes public property. When your fire is used to keep others warm, and no one remembers to ask if you're freezing. So ask yourself, who would you be if you stopped giving for a week? Would people still love you? Would they stay if all you offered was your silence? That's the test. Because real love doesn't require your constant effort. It rests in your existence. And if they can't love you without your labor, they don't love you, they love the light you cast. Frida learned that. Hedy lived that. And you might be living it now. But this is where the reckoning becomes freedom. The moment you realize you don't need to disappear to be valued, you don't need to give endlessly to be worthy, the moment you start protecting your fire instead of proving it, you begin to exist again. Because the truth is, not everyone deserves access to your energy. Not every heart can handle your depth. Not every soul you save will remember your name. And that's okay. You're not here to be remembered for what you gave away. You're here to be recognized for what you chose to keep. So if you've lost yourself in the giving, this is your reminder your worth was never measured by your usefulness. It was measured by your being. And sometimes the bravest thing you can give the world is your boundaries. The truth is, life doesn't reward how much you give. It rewards how well you protect what's sacred. For years, you may have believed that giving endlessly made you noble. You thought sacrifice was virtue. You thought love meant losing pieces of yourself for someone else's comfort. But you were never meant to be the world's endless supply of warmth. You were meant to be its reminder of boundaries, of balance, of beauty that doesn't beg to be seen. Because a man who gives without awareness loses more than time, he loses his gravity. And once you lose your gravity, everything you built starts orbiting someone else's need. But here's where the story changes. The moment you start giving with clarity instead of compulsion, the entire world begins to rearrange itself around your strength. This is what I call strategic kindness. It's the discipline of giving without bleeding. It's the wisdom of helping without handing over your soul. It's not cold. It's conscious. See, power doesn't mean refusing to give. It means refusing to be drained. It's not about walls, it's about filters. You decide what passes through. You decide who gets access to your time, your emotions, your energy. That's what it means to reclaim your garden. Every flower becomes a choice, not a reaction. Every act of kindness becomes deliberate, not desperate. You stop giving to prove your worth. You start giving to express your strength. When you speak, your words carry weight again. When you say no, it doesn't sound like defense, it sounds like direction. And that's when the world shifts. Because people don't respect kindness they didn't have to earn. They respect kindness that comes from restraint. The world tests the edges of everything. If you have no edge, it won't see your shape. That's why you must be firm, not hard. Kind, not naive. Empathetic, but untouchable. There's a quiet authority in someone who knows their limits. They don't shout, they don't chase, they don't explain. They move through life like water soft where they choose, unstoppable where they must. And maybe that's the kind of man you're meant to become. Not the giver who gets forgotten, but the one whose presence itself is a gift. Because the world doesn't need more people who pour themselves empty. It needs people who remind others what wholeness looks like. So ask yourself when you give, do you feel lighter or smaller? Do you feel expanded or erased? That's your compass. If it drains you, it's not generosity, it's guilt. If it nourishes you, it's purpose. That's how you rebuild your garden. You plant boundaries like fences, not walls. You water your peace before you water anyone else's chaos. And you don't apologize for protecting your sunlight. Because here's the quiet truth power understands. The more you guard your inner world, the more valuable your gifts become. When you give less often, people listen harder. When you appear less, your presence hits deeper. When you choose your moments, your silence speaks louder than 1,000 empty apologies. This is how power breathes in pauses, in restraint, in the ability to hold back what everyone else would throw away. You are not here to prove your heart. You are here to master it. Because when you master your giving, you master your energy. And when you master your energy, you stop being manipulated. You start being magnetic. That's the difference between kindness and influence. Kindness is when they like you. Influence is when they respect you. And respect, that's what keeps your garden alive. So from now on, don't give away your flowers to every smile. Don't open your gates just because someone admires the view. Wait, watch, discern. And when you do give with the strength of someone who could have kept it all and chose not to. Because that's real power. Not withholding, not pretending, but giving from a place that no longer needs validation. The man who learns this becomes untouchable. His peace is private. His energy is sovereign. His kindness is strategy. And when someone offers him a flower, he smiles not out of need, but out of knowing. He offers one back and keeps his garden growing behind him. Because he's learned the truth most never do it was never about the flower. It was about remembering who the soil belonged to. They say Nikola Tesla died alone, but maybe that's not true. Maybe he just learned what the rest of us are too afraid to admit, that the world was never built to protect the ones who give too much. He gave away lightning, and they left him in the dark. But the irony is this: they needed his light to find their way back home. And that's you, isn't it? You've given your time, your love, your fire to people who only showed up when they needed warmth. But here's the truth. Tesla never got to live long enough to see the power you give away doesn't disappear. It waits, it gathers, it remembers who it came from. Every time you said yes when you wanted to say no, every time you helped, when you were hurting, every time you stayed when you could have left, you were building something inside yourself the world couldn't steal. You were becoming the storm. And one day, the same people who took your light will look up and realize the thunder was always yours. So keep your garden. Guard your flame. Be kind, but not careless. Because the world doesn't need another man who burns himself to be seen. It needs a man who knows how to shine without permission. Tesla gave away his lightning. You don't have to. Now it's your turn to become the storm that doesn't ask who's watching before it strikes.